My name is Conrad. I am currently 28 years old, and I'm diagnosed with hypermobility spectrum disorder um, at the moment, at the very least. And my son is currently not diagnosed. He is just about to turn 9, and we are in the midst of a whole custody case with, you know, investigations. There have been family and children's services involved and things like that. And I am always blown away by how it got from what I thought was just a fairly normal thing that ran in my family, that was my family and a part of our identity, that was not even a medical issue at all, to being accused of coercing him into an illness and, essentially like a Munchausen by proxy sort of thing. In that time, I taught him to cope without realizing that I was doing that. That was just how I was raised. That was how my whole family was raised. And that was normal. I don't have a single totally unaffected sibling. My dad is affected. My brother's kids are affected. This is just a normal thing for us, my grandparents, everyone. Um, so there are a lot of different things that are fairly typical to these conditions that we just associated with being a part of our family. And the coping strategies and the solutions that came along with that were just handed down over generations, and that was normal. If you had GI issues, there were so many different solutions for that. It was expected that kids would fall, that they would get hurt, that they would struggle with sports, that they would struggle with handwriting. That was a normal thing. So we just had solutions for that, and they weren't really visible as problems, even for my son, until he moved to a different home where the parenting style was different, where the approach didn't account for those things. And then suddenly there was this need to push for support for him that I had always assumed would just come naturally. So I had to find words for these experiences that were not going to create conflict and that were still significant enough to get across his needs, unless it's a medical issue, unless it's necessary. And I mean, recommended, like doctor recommended necessary, then these fairly simple problems, or at least they feel simple to me, become something much bigger and much more poignant, and you have to provide, you know, essentially proof and evidence that these things are real, which is something I was never really sufficiently able to do even for myself. So when I did finally get a diagnosis, I was thrilled by all of the opportunity that there was to prevent in advance and anticipate issues that were highly impactful for me. So, for example, I was never able to finish high school, and I envisioned kind of a future for my son where he could just get help with, the hand pain that he would experience, the difficulties in coordination and in holding a pencil. I envisioned these kind of parallels where I had experienced, you can't hold your pencil like that, that's wrong. He would experience, here's a different way to hold your pencil. You don't need to put that much pressure into it. Here's a grip that you can put on your pencil, something like that. Here's finger splints, they'll help with that. These, I envisioned a future where he could have a radically different experience, and where the focus for him would not be on finding a way to incorporate these challenges into his sense of self without, developing mental health issues secondary to that, but could instead just be free to form his own identity, where he would have something to point to and say, well, this is because of that. It's not something I'm doing wrong. It's not something that's lesser than, lesser than other people, or that's less about me. And a lot of the time, that doesn't have much to do with the clinical side of things. It's just that for whatever reason, broader society wants these clinical terms. They want papers that are signed by doctors, that are written by specialists, before they will do that. I'm prevented for a number of reasons now from attending appointments with him. There is a legal stipulation in place now. I'm not allowed to make appointments for him until a proper court case can be held to make sure that I'm not a risk to him. I started trying to get him support before I had a diagnosis. Then I had a diagnosis, and I thought, well, this is great. Maybe I can just go in and say, I have this diagnosis now. The signs of this run in my family. Can he just be assessed to make sure that he's not also affected by it? More to rule it out than to rule it in. And I worked so hard not to project my experiences onto him, because I didn't want him to have that same experience. I didn't want him to feel like he just couldn't make the cut and that was his fault. So I did my best to frame everything in a very positive way, even before I had a diagnosis. Just, I did my best with that. And that ultimately got used against me and against him. I mean, there were other people that I think a counselor, as well as his other parents, who took the time to say, you don't have to pretend to have these problems so that you can relate to Conrad. I don't know exactly what their impression of it was, but they came back at me with this narrative like, you just want him to live his life in a wheelchair hooked up to IVs. He doesn't need leg braces. He doesn't need a wheelchair. He doesn't need to be exempt from gym class and these things. He deserves to have a normal life. We want him to have a normal life. Not really. It was so far removed from my goal, which was, if he has these needs, let's accommodate them before they get bad. But I'm not the only one. There are other people, and there are specialists who, even if they can't give you a solution for this, you can call up and they will tell you I'm not the only one. That's huge. That's the difference between ending up hospitalized for mental health issues or just being given a different pain medication. It's so hard to believe that would make that much difference, but it really does. And I just want that for my son. And I don't really care about whether or not he gets a diagnosis. Like, what I care about is that he gets support.